all. The first question tonight. My question is that I've been practicing for over a year now and started to bow to my Buddha. But what do we bow to? I know we should bow to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, but is there anything else I should bow to? Well, bowing is a practice that we've inherited from the past. It's a way of physically lowering yourself as a way to make yourself mindful of certain qualities. So when you bow to a Buddha statue, you're recollecting the qualities that the Buddha symbolizes. So the main qualities are the great wisdom, compassion and purity of mind. I mean the mind that is pure from the mental defilements of the Buddha. They're the three main qualities. So the physical lowering of your body, physical inclination of your body towards the Buddha and down to the ground is a physical representation of your mind inclining towards those qualities. So it's you're humbling yourself, lowering your ego, your conceit, your arrogance, your pride, your stubbornness. Some of those mental defilements which obstruct us from seeing the truth, seeing the Dhamma, which is the truth, cultivating the path, the noble path, which is another one of the qualities that the Arya Sangha, the Sangha, symbolize. Often in life we are walking around, as Ajahn Buddhadasa used to say, like we're not much different from the dogs that walk down the street with their heads held high, their ears pricked up, their tails up, ready for action. We have a lot of ego, self, in our thinking, our attitude. We say that, don't we? Say, you've got attitude to someone with a lot of self in a situation. And so we're primed and ready to follow the mental defilements of greed, anger and delusion all the time. So when you physically stop and bow, you're interrupting the flow of your conceit, your ego. So if you appreciate that point, you can see it as a very useful tool or practice to pause, slow down, incline your mind to think of all these wholesome qualities that the Buddha represents. And there's many more than just wisdom, compassion and purity. You could think of all the 10 paramis of the Buddha. So generosity and renunciation and morality and patience, endurance and wisdom and effort and kindness and truthfulness and resolution and equanimity. These qualities that the Buddha perfected over many lifetimes. So you're also recognizing the sacrifice of that being who became the Buddha. Siddhartha was his name, the Prince Siddhartha, but over many lifetimes sacrificed with the intention of bringing the Dhamma to all beings. Because the Buddha is self-enlightened, didn't have a teacher, because there was no teacher, but cultivated the qualities to be self-enlightened, which is a very rare, exceptional thing and of great benefit to us. You might say the highest benefit and the highest sacrifice on our behalf. So we have a way of practice and training for our own liberation. And the gift of Dhamma is more useful than any other gift. So you bow to those things that are really valuable, useful to you, inspire you. And you're also making your own aspiration to cultivate the same qualities that the Buddha cultivated in your own heart. This Noble Eightfold Path that will lead to enlightenment. So there may be a particular quality you bow to or remember or recollect as you bow, or there may be a number of qualities. But the more mindful and aware you are as you bow, the more you'll recollect these wholesome qualities, and it has a very good effect on your mind. And you can bow many times a day, as anyone who lives in a monastery knows. You can spend a lot of time bowing, and some people take on practices of bowing. The Tibetans are famous for their 100,000 prostration practices and so on. So you've got a choice when you bow what you recollect in particular, but it's generally the qualities of the Buddha, qualities of the Dhamma, qualities of the Sangha, which you can get from the suttas or even from the evening chanting translation in our chanting book. This will remind you of some of these qualities. And as I said, you're pausing, slowing down, becoming mindful when you bow. So it's a very good practice to interrupt the flow of mental defilements, bring up mindfulness. The next question: what is the difference between generosity, chaka, and giving, dana? Well, other than that they're different words spelled differently, relatively little. I mean, the heart of generosity and giving, or chaka and dana, is much the same. They're just different words, but they're describing more or less the same thing. Sometimes they can be used interchangeably. But dana tends to be referring to, we say, material dana, so particularly the giving of material things to support Sangha, to support a certain person or group of people, so giving donations of things to the poor, the sick, somebody who just has a need. But it could be dana and giving a present to someone as well, a gift to somebody. Chaka can be a little bit more, it can be more impersonal. I mean, it can include those things, of items of dana and that practice of dana and giving as well. But chaka, it's the quality of sacrificing for others, a good cause, and often it's in a more impersonal way. So you give a donation and help to build a meditation hall or a dwelling that is not for a particular person. You could probably call it Sangha dana of a kind, so it's still dana, but you can make donations to charity, and it's more just supporting a good cause for a good purpose, but not specifically for an individual, giving an item to an individual. It's a more general kind of giving. Chaka often refers to those kinds of charitable work, sacrifice for good causes, and so on, which is coming from the same root as dana. Giving, letting go of your stinginess, your possessiveness, and doing something that is useful and beneficial for others. But chaka is often done in a way where it's not a specific act of giving this gift to that person. Often it's done in a more broader sense. And when you recollect chaka, you're recollecting some of the broader kinds of sharing or giving that you've done in the past. But essentially they're the same quality of mind. Chaka is used as a basis for a meditation as well. You say chakanussati, recollecting the sacrifices you've made, particularly donations given, help given, sacrifices made. And I mean, that can also be in the family or for an individual, or for the religion, or for society in some way or other. But it uplifts the mind when you do this, and it's quite a good practice to do, particularly if you're running into a dead end in your meditation. You're lacking energy, lacking inspiration, you can't follow your normal meditation object, you can't stick with the breath, it's too hard to find, your mind is restless or depressed or scattered. It can be a very uplifting meditation to introduce, recollecting the acts of sacrifice and giving that one has done in the past. So that will include dana, so maybe dana given to monks or some gift given to somebody. Of course, sangha dana, the Buddha praised as the highest kind of dana, supporting the sangha, because the sangha is those beings who are keeping precepts, have the integrity, the precepts of the Vinaya, and they're practicing for Nibbana and have renounced the world for practicing for Nibbana. And you offer to Sangha, you're offering to all the Sangha, the junior, the senior, the enlightened, the unenlightened, everyone. You're recognizing the potential for enlightenment in everyone in the Sangha. And the Sangha leads us on. It's one of our refuges and leads us on to many good things. We say it's a field of merit. So the Sangha dana you make is very powerful, good karma. So you practice Chakanussati, recollection of dana given. So that could include Sangha dana, or building a hospital, or giving a donation to a charity to help some good cause, helping cancer research, or could be going on a sponsored run or walk to raise funds for charity. It's jhaka as well, and you recollect that in your meditation, and it uplifts you. Some of the good that you've done in the past, you consciously bring up those memories, but you're also, as you practice that meditation, you're refining it down to a point where you're just recollecting the quality of giving, sacrifice for the common good, for others. So it's a very pure kind of thought, very wholesome intention. When you keep recollecting that over and over again, then the mind can gather in samadhi. One could attain upajjhara samadhi. You couldn't attain jhana doing that kind of meditation because it's a reflective, discursive meditation where you may have just one word or one object in mind, but it can bring you to the point where you drop the hindrances and enter upajjhara samadhi. So it's still a very valid meditation subject and one you can experiment with. Sometimes they give it to people when they're close to death to recollect the sacrifices, the generosity, the charity they've done in their life, because it uplifts them before they die. Another question on the 4 nutriments: ahara, material food, contact, mental volition, and consciousness. These are the 4 nutriments. When material food is fully understood, parijanati, passion for the 5 strands of sensual pleasure is fully understood. Can Ajahn please explain? Well, material food, of whatever kind it is, you eat to support this body, and this body supports the 5 senses: eyes, ears, tongue, nose, skin. And these are the basis for the 5 strands of sensual pleasure. We see sights, we delight, we like to see things. We look and we get fascinated and lost in sights. And similarly, sound, taste, smell, touch. We get lost in sense pleasure. That's what attracts us. We're looking for sense pleasure. And sometimes just a tiny bit of pleasure is better than nothing. So, if you're in a mood where you're bored or frustrated, and often people on meditation retreats experience this, they've been doing a lot of meditation and they just start craving some stimulation of their senses, any stimulation. Maybe they haven't been using their phone, their computer, haven't been talking to anyone, haven't been travelling, or haven't, one meal a day of very simple food perhaps, a very little sensual stimulation. So then they start craving things and they have this desire just for any stimulation. Anything will do. So any sight, any new sight, new sound. So monks get this problem as well. Sometimes they're in the monastery and they haven't, maybe they previously used to listen to music. And when you're a layperson and you listen to music, you choose the music you like to listen to. You buy it, or you source the very kind of music you like, whatever style, songs, classical, jazz, rock, pop, whatever. You like certain music, you'll source that. But in a monastery, you don't get any choice at all and you hardly hear any music at all. But maybe one day you hear some song wafting in across the airways of the sky. Somebody's playing something in their house or in their yard. And it may be a song that you've never liked or never wanted, but suddenly it becomes delightful because it's better than nothing. And that's the same with food, with sights. Sometimes any sight, any bit of food, any taste, any smell, any touch, anything is better than nothing. So we get used to seeking sense pleasures with our senses. But sense pleasures are impermanent, suffering, not self, when grasped at with ignorance. And material food represents these sense pleasures. They're one and the same thing, aren't they? This body is fed by material food, supported, nourished by material food, kept going by material food. So these 5 strands of sense pleasure are kept going by the material food we eat. But whether you're looking at the material food or the sense pleasures and the senses that source and seek sense pleasure, they're all impermanent, suffering, not self. They're conditioned things. No food, we die. That's one condition for life, and that's one condition for the 5 strands of sense pleasure. You die, you don't have any sense pleasure anymore, it's gone. Even when you're alive, and even when you have food, the sense pleasures we experience are temporary, aren't they? You see a nice sight, an interesting sound, hear an interesting sound, you taste something good, smell something fragrant that attracts you. But all these sense objects arise, pass away. They can't bring us sustained or lasting happiness. And they bring us a lot of pain because you keep chasing them, keep craving them, and then they drop away from you, you lose them again, they run out or they end. And they're not self because you can't command and control the 5 strands of sense pleasure to just give you what you want all the time. They go according to causes and conditions. So much the same as material food. Material food is also limited, isn't it? You can't eat forever, and sometimes you don't get food for whatever reason. You're hungry and you can't get food for a while maybe. So food and the sense pleasures are pretty much synonymous. You understand one, you understand the others. You understand the limitations of food, that it's impermanent, suffering, not self. You understand the limitations of the 5 strands of sense pleasures, impermanent, suffering, not self. This is one reason why yogis practice to attain jhana and then the arupa jhanas, where they don't need a body anymore and they're reborn as arupa brahmas. They've got no more bodies, so it's like that can be mistaken for the highest happiness, nibbana, because you got rid of material food and all the trouble of seeking food and eating and chewing and chomping and washing up afterwards and going to the toilet and all the problems of food. Get rid of that by becoming an arupa brahma, no body. But even that realm doesn't last forever. It lasts a long, long time, but it's not eternal happiness or perfect happiness. It's not the highest that a human can experience because it's still impermanent. And what is impermanent is suffering, is not self. So very closely linked, food and sense pleasure. And often you'll notice when you reduce your food or even fast, sometimes your senses become diminished. They're not so stimulated, and your desire for the objects of the senses is reduced. Because you reduce your food, you've got less energy and less ability to sort of enjoy things. Next question. On the 4 modes of identification, these 2 modes seem the same to me. 1, the self as possessing any of the 5 aggregates, and 2, any of the 5 aggregates as in the self. What is the difference between these 2? Well, as the description says, one is the view that the self possesses the 5 aggregates, and one view is that the self is in the 5 aggregates. What's common is that they are both views that one's clinging to, and they are fed by ignorance. There are different views of self. Self is in the 5 aggregates, owning the 5 aggregates, apart from the 5 aggregates, and so on. Many views of self human beings develop out of ignorance, whether it's coming from hearing the wrong Dhamma from a teacher or another person, or just one's own wrong assumptions based on greed, anger, delusion. The wrong views conform, and we hold on to them, and they're a cause of suffering. So if the self owns or possesses the 5 aggregates, that's your view, then when the 5 aggregates don't do what you want, your self gets annoyed. We don't like to get old, we don't like to get sick, we don't like pain in our legs, we don't like having certain thoughts and feelings that don't agree with us, so we get annoyed or disappointed or despairing. These 5 aggregates, we think that we own them, say, but we don't. They go according to causes and conditions, and they are the products of our karma, and they'll throw up all kinds of vibhaka karma, resultant karma, just when you don't want it. So you're just enjoying life, and suddenly you have a pain in the leg, or you're just enjoying life and suddenly you have an unpleasant memory or thought pop up and changes your mood. It's that simple, isn't it? It can be very quick that your whole experience of the khandhas changes because of conditioning. So whether you're seeing the khandhas as the self, in the self, apart from the self, the same as the self, these are all views in the sense they're coming from ignorance. And our aim in practice is to develop mindfulness, clear comprehension, and investigate the truth, so that our mind is just seeing the truth, knowing and seeing the true way of things, rather than just from a viewpoint which we believe in or hold on to, but is conditioned by ignorance. So, the stream enterer has abandoned many of these wrong views because they see the true nature of khandhas as impermanent suffering, not self. Their view changes, and what comes up in the place of wrong views is Dhamma, seeing the true nature of things, rather than just a certain belief system or set of views. Now the mind is seeing things as they are, so immediately a lot of suffering is removed from the mind. So the Buddha said, the Sotapanna only has a tiny little bit of suffering left. They still have some suffering, because they're still alive and they still have some kilesas arising, but won't be born more than 7 more lifetimes. So the amount of suffering left for them to go through is fairly minimal. So the Buddha scratched the earth and asked the monks, what's more, the dirt under my fingernails or all the dirt in the world? And the monks obviously said that all the dirt in the world is much more than what's under your fingernails. And he said, well, that's like comparing the suffering left for the Sotapanna, fingernail level dirt, and the suffering left for the unenlightened person who could be living for endless more lifetimes. It's like all the earth, all the dirt in the world. And one of the main reasons the Sotapanna has only a little bit of this suffering is because he's eradicated a lot of wrong views. Now the Sotapanna knows he's 5 candidates, khandhas, these 5 aggregates are impermanent suffering, not self. Another question. For beings hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, renewed existence, puna bhava, in the future is established through delight in this and that. What is delight, and why is delight an important factor for rebirth? Because you want to be reborn, you want to continue delighting in things. We're not done, we're not fed up with it yet. We're not fed up with the suffering that all this delighting brings. We're still fascinated, we want a little bit more. However painful it is, we want more. We're not bored with it and fed up with it yet. So what is suffering? The Buddha explained over and over again, birth is suffering, it's painful. Physical childbirth is painful. You can die in the womb and you certainly have a lot of suffering in the womb, and mum has suffering, and you're born and you're exposed to pain and suffering already, and then aging and sickness and death are suffering, because once you're born you must die. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are suffering. So all these things are suffering. So of course our mind is always looking to delight in things to get away from some of this suffering, in the hope that delighting in things will solve the problem. But actually delighting in things prolongs the problem, prolongs the agony of suffering, because it's the basis for more craving and attachment, attaching to these khandhas as self. And by the time you reach the end of your life, however quick or slow that may come, you're not done with delighting, so the mind, your consciousness is still conditioned by the desire to delight in things. It wants things, wants to see, taste, smell, touch things. And you also have to remember, delighting in things is also conditioning aversion, anger, hatred. The word delight we associate with enjoyment and pleasure, but actually it also conditions displeasure and dissatisfaction. Because if you don't get what you want, when you're trying to delight in something, you don't get what you want, or it's not as good as you want, or it doesn't last as long as you want, you get annoyed, you get upset. And we delight in being upset, to be honest. That doesn't sound like it, but we do. We delight in our anger. That's why we get angry. If we didn't delight in anger, we wouldn't get angry. We wouldn't get disappointed. We delight in disappointment, sadness. So this word delight, it actually means indulging and holding on to both pleasure and pain, pleasant experiences and painful experiences, based on identifying these khandhas as self. And that's not done when we die, so it leads to rebirth. We've made karma, and at the time of death, karma gives its result, and consciousness is continuing to receive the fruits of karma at death. As long as there's a sense of self, delighting in things, well, that process continues. The arahant, the enlightened one, has gone beyond that. They're no longer delighting in anything. The mind is free from that. It's no longer deluded by anything. They know the nature of this world is impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, not worth delighting in. The mind has gone to a higher place. It's not attached to the world. The mind is as if separate from the world. So the arahant, still in the world while they're alive, still have a body, they still taste nice food, they still can see something pleasant, beautiful, they still have senses, and they can still have sense pleasure, but they don't delight in it anymore. They see it as it truly is, as impermanent suffering to be abandoned, relinquished. So that their experience of things is different than the unenlightened person. So that's why you develop the path, mindfulness, insight. It leads to relinquishment, letting go, dispassion, disenchantment, dispassion, ultimately leads to the unconditioned. The unconditioned is not delighting in anything. It's not from an act of willpower or forcing it. It's just naturally the mind sees the way things are and doesn't delight in it anymore. It's no longer fooled by anything. So, as the Buddha said, the beautiful royal chariot that was so enticing and fascinating to the mind is seen through as just a collection of component parts that are destined to fall apart. It doesn't last, so it's no longer a fascination for the mind. Mind doesn't delight in it anymore. For a royal chariot, you can read in whatever it is that you like to delight in, whether it's food or clothes or cars or anything in this world. Another question. When I chant iti piso 108 times, I get stressed, keeping count, and want to give up. Should I press on or stop? Yeah, I sometimes sympathize people taking on these practices to chant. Iti piso means the recollection of or praise of the Buddha, the 9 main qualities of the Buddha. So there's this chant, iti piso bhagava arahang samma. And so if you chant 1 and then twice and then 3 times, well, it starts to build up in terms of time, and then to keep track can be tricky. So some people, I guess, find that they get stressed keeping count because they've made a plan, a determination to chant 108 times. They don't want to renege on what they've determined. So then, they get to 57 and you can just see it, can't you? Chanting it 57 times, going well, and then you just forget what number you're on. And you get stressed about it. Maybe you get angry that you've forgotten or annoyed, or you're just trying so hard to not forget that you feel uncomfortable. Maybe you get a headache. So part of this is to do with being mindful and clearly comprehending the kind of effort that you need to do this. Maybe you could introduce some wisdom as well, and you accept maybe sometimes you chant 103 times or 117 times. Another way of looking at these numbers in Buddhism is sometimes you just say, chant it a lot. So if you can do 108, good, but if you don't make it quite to 108, it's not the end of the world. You just chant it a lot. So you spend a lot of time doing it mindfully, so you're less stressed by keeping count. Or you could find a method to keep count very simply. So in the old days they used to have 108 beads on their beads, a string of beads, and they just move 1 down when they chanted once. So you're chanting and you hold the beads and you just move 1 bead, and maybe your beads have a little mark on so you know where you are at. And when you've reached round to 108, you know you've done your 108 because you've moved 1 bead per chant. You could introduce a way to count for you, help you count, or you could diminish the importance of the number 108 so that you're not stressed. But I'd try not to give up, because we're always looking for excuses to give up our practices, whether it's meditation on the breath, chanting 108 times, iti piso. We love to have excuses to stop. So rather than stopping, maybe just adjust your effort. Maybe don't try so hard or take it so seriously that you get very upset when you lose count, or because you might lose count, your fear of losing count. Try to do it in a relaxed way, but keep bringing up energy, putting effort into it, and just keep going. And if you lose count, we'll just carry on and maybe start again or whatever. But don't get so stressed about it, but do it as a way of practicing mindfulness. And of course, if samadhi arises as you're chanting, you can even stop the chanting and just sit there and enter a state of samadhi. Ajahn Kalyano used to say, if you're listening to a Dhamma talk, and it may be a very good Dhamma talk and a good explanation, but your mind goes into samadhi, fine. You just go into samadhi at that point. You stop listening or you stop chanting. Quite often myself and other people I know, they've been chanting and you go into a very bright, happy state because of the recollection of the chant, the meaning of it, or just the mindfulness that comes up, well, that's fine. Go into samadhi. So you want to keep this relaxed effort, and don't get stressed about the chanting, or if you're getting stressed, consciously find a way to relax your effort at that time. Rather than just quitting altogether, just see if you can adjust your approach, your attitude to what you're doing. That might be better. Another question. In the Dvaitaka Sutta, the Buddha instructs us to put aside thoughts of sensual desire, thinking, this leads to my own affliction, to others' affliction, and to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. Can you please explain the breadth and depth of sensuality meant here? Well, obviously sensuality begins with these 5 strands, 5 senses, and the perceptions that come up from them, the memories, the perceptions, and then the volitions wanting more. And you know the world is a very complex place, so our sense desires can become very complex. So, one person likes this, another person likes that. One person is stimulated by this, another by that. There's a whole range, massive range, endless range of sense objects out there and combinations of sense objects. So it's everything. But the whole point is when you get lost in sensuality, imagining things, remembering things, or actually using your senses, seeing things, tasting things, touching things, if you've got no mindfulness at that point, then you're coming from a place of ignorance, craving and attachment, which is stimulating more ignorance, craving and attachment. So this is the cycle of samsara. You're going in the opposite direction from Nibbana, as this said. If it leads you to away from Nibbana. So any sense objects or sense consciousness arising that is met without mindfulness, without clear comprehension, without right effort, without some wisdom, will stimulate more kilesa, greed, anger, illusion, more craving, more attachment, more ignorance. So it's like the cycle of dependent arising is spun one more round, so you're going deeper into suffering and the causes of suffering. There's more difficulties. It's going to lead to your affliction. Maybe it leads you to do things which afflict others as well. So our practice is always going to bring the wheel the other way. Establish mindfulness, clear comprehension, so that you can see craving arising based on sense contact and abandon it. And therefore undermine the process where attachment is formed. Undermine the process where renewed birth is taking place or being conditioned. So you're going in the complete opposite direction towards Nibbana, the unconditioned, rather than towards more conditioning, more suffering, more birth. So the breadth and depth of sensuality was everything. Everything that your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin can throw at you, and then all the ideas and concepts and memories and perceptions based on that. So high, low, near, far, internal, external, whatever, wherever, everything. So put aside thoughts of sensual desire. So stop thinking about these things. That's why we do samatha practice. A lot of samatha practice helps you to put aside thoughts of sensual desire. You bring up the thought of one object, such as the breath. So When you're successfully being mindful of the breath, you're not following sense desire for other things. If you're with the breath and a sense desire pops up into your mind, let it go. Don't follow it, and don't seek out more sense desire. And so you reflect on the harm, the affliction that comes from following sense desire forever. What does it lead us to do? You're always going out looking for more sensual experience, and more. That means in this world, it means you're going out to earn money, so you can buy more things, have more pleasant experiences, and often that leads us into conflict with other people, competing in education, competing to get jobs, competing to earn our living, competing with our neighbours, other people in the world. We're all competing for this world, aren't we? The things of this world. We even compete with animals and bugs. You just sit here and a little mosquito lands on you. That's competing with you for the objects of the senses. Life is one big competition, isn't it? So often we're doing things which afflict others or afflict ourselves, or both. And sensuality is doing that. That's why you become a monk. It's called a brahmacharya. You live the holy life. You live celibate, and you just depend on alms, whatever people are willing to share with you. You can't go out and ask and demand for anything. So you reduce that amount of affliction that you're cultivating for yourself and others. You still might do it a little bit, but less, because you're moving away from the world towards nibbana. Or when you meditate, you're doing that. So even a layperson, you're earning a living, and you try to practice right livelihood and not bother anyone, just earn an honest living. It's hard. Sometimes you forget yourself and you end up harming others or harming yourself. But when you meditate, you're moving towards nibbana then, so you're getting a glimpse of the mind of renunciation, letting go. And you keep cultivating that. So the internet is a good example, isn't it? What is the breadth and depth of sensuality? The internet. Everything is there. Whatever you want. It's not the entire breadth and depth of sensuality, but it's a sort of an example of the extensiveness of it. Next question. How do we know when it is Dhammachanda and not sensual desire? Does the desire to hear true Dhamma, meditate, or do dana come under the former? Generally, yes. Then generally you have Dhammachanda. That means Dhammachanda means the desire to practice the Dhamma for liberation. So it's wholesome desire. So the desire to hear the Dhamma so you can understand. Of course, desire can still slip in, unwholesome desire, craving can slip into even the desire to hear Dhamma. So you might fall under the influence of a certain defilement as you're listening to Dhamma, and you get bored with it or averse to it, or you may delight in it to the point where you attach too much just to the words or the sound or the face of the one talking. And I've seen this before. Lay people sitting there going, "Oh, he gives such wonderful talks," and the other one goes, "So what did he say?" "Oh, I don't know, but I just like watching his face, listening to his voice," or her voice. So, sensuality can slip in, of course, interrupting your meditation, your Dhammachanda for meditating, offering dana. You're so proud of the food you've created to offer to monks, say, for example. It's just one kind of dana. But you're offering dana, and the sensuality is there. "Oh, this is me. I offer such beautifully presented food. I cooked it so well." You forget the actual purpose of it and go more into the sensuality of it. So even in good things, we can fall under the influence of craving and sensuality. But generally speaking, the path of practice we develop, we have Dhammachanda is that desire to put the mind on an object in meditation. So put the mind on the breath, for example, abandon the hindrances. So sensual desire doesn't lead to peace, doesn't lead to samadhi, doesn't lead to wholesome states of mind. It takes the mind to greed, aversion, delusion. It feeds the hindrances, it feeds states of mind that are coarse, unwholesome, not peaceful. So you start watching, the result of your mental formations and fabrications to see what's going on. And Dhammachanda will lead on to action, skillful action. You meditate, you offer dana, you keep precepts, you listen to Dhamma, you reflect on the Dhamma. Sensual desire and craving will lead on to wanting something. So in Dhamma practice, that could be wanting the results of your meditation. I want to feel blissful, I want a peaceful mind, I want to see something. So in the Dhamma practice it can still slip in, or it'll just go back to the worldly thinking. So you're meditating but you start wanting food, wanting the object of sexual desire, or wanting to hear music, or you want to sleep, or you want this or you want that. So the direction the mind is going very different. So you start looking at the results of what you're doing, and that's where you can often pick up on whether you're being motivated by sensual desire or Dhammachanda. Next question. Please can you explain how we can purposely develop thoughts of renunciation of sensual desire? See below. Mendicants, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of her mind. Bhikkhuni, inclination of her mind. If she frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of renunciation, she has abandoned the thought of sensual desire to cultivate the thought of renunciation, and then her mind inclines to thoughts of renunciation. Yes, we have to train in thoughts of renunciation. So if we frequently think and ponder upon thoughts of renunciation, that's where the mind will incline. If we frequently think and ponder upon thoughts of getting what we want, that's not renunciation, that's possessiveness, acquiring, seeking, searching, acquiring. So that's what sensual desire does, isn't it? It goes in a different direction. So you use thoughts of renunciation, letting go, relinquishment, to counter the thoughts of wanting and seeking the objects of sense desire. So how can we purposely develop thoughts of renunciation of sensual desire? Well, very good one to develop is the thought of impermanence. Doesn't last, it's not sure, it's not certain, doesn't last, the happiness, the pleasure doesn't last, it's not satisfying, and it increases your attachment. So it actually takes you further away from the true happiness of the peaceful mind of the unconditioned. So just keep reminding yourself, this won't last, it's not that great, it's not as great as you think it will be. It won't last as long as you want it to last. It won't bring you as much pleasure as you want. This pleasure is limited, and it's dangerous because it leads you to more desire and more attachment. The mind of renunciation is superior, although it's hard to develop, but once you start to get a taste for it, it's enjoyable. And that's what samadhi is. A large part of samadhi is you're renouncing sense pleasure. So your mind goes inwards to an object, the wholesome object, lets go of sense objects. And you can use reflection as well to help you, so reflect on the impermanence, the suffering of attachment, or even the selfless nature of sense desire and the objects of sense desire. They're not yours, you don't own them. They're conditions that don't last, they're suffering, they're not self, therefore to be let go of. And the mind of equanimity, detachment, relinquishment is better. It's happier in the higher sense of the word. Practically speaking, if you put effort into meditation, say breathing meditation or any other meditation subject you use, and you do it successfully, if only just once, you're mindful of your breath or an aspect of the body or recollection of the Buddha, you do it successfully once and the hindrances fade away, so the mind stops desiring, wanting things, stops falling into aversion, it's not sleepy, it's not restless, worried, afraid, not doubting. The hindrances drop away and your mind experiences the peace of one-pointedness, samadhi, for a while. That's a very important step in your practice because it gives you the sort of confidence that you can let go and that you'll experience the happiness of letting go. So it's like, oh, I know this is good. You've done it once. You can do it again. And it's giving you insight into the impermanence of sense objects, their limitation, the superiority of the peaceful mind, and then this also supports developing insight, further insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the selfless nature of body and mind. So it's a very important step. And one thing, of course, though, is you experience the peace and happiness, the radiant mind of samadhi, and then of course the next time you meditate you want to experience it again, and if you can't then you get disappointed. So be careful of the attachment to the bliss and the peace of samadhi. So samadhi itself is another condition that's impermanent, but it gives you this taste of nibbana, towards nibbana, and it gives you a taste of renunciation and relinquishment. Then it makes things a little bit easier next time round. Next time you have some sense desire bugging you, something really has grabbed you, and you can't shake it off, but you remember the peace of samadhi, the mind of peace. It gives you some motivation, some extra energy to let go, because you know you can let go and because there's a higher happiness to be had. So, quite a lot of questions tonight. Hopefully some of that has been useful for you, but we'll leave it there today.